let's talk about the dollar index tonight. So, for over 48 hours now, the dollar index has been above 99. I was waiting to see if it would close above 99. It has. It closed above 99 yesterday, and today it's above 99, although in the Forex markets, money truly never sleeps. But for the dollar to stay above 99 on the dollar index for at least 2 days, I would say, is a clear trend. So the more the dollar stays above 99, the more of a base it will build. The more the dollar bears will not be able to say that the top is in the dollar. And as I've laid out the case for well over a year now, that the more the dollar rallies with the amount of dollar denominated debt outstanding, with the dollar liabilities outstanding, with derivatives, these forward dollar swaps, which the Bank of International Settlements spent about 24 pages at length talking about in their 150-page December 2019 global macro update. So the forward dollar swaps, these dollar liability derivatives, are a very big deal that most people in the gold community do not want to talk about. They also don't want to talk about the dollar denominated debt. If you want a balanced view on the dollar, look at Brent Johnson, who is in the gold community, but he has the dollar and the dollar milkshake. I agree with a lot of what Brent Johnson says of Santiago Capital. I don't agree with everything about what he says. I'm more of a in between with the dollar. I'm not bullish or bearish on the dollar. I'm more dollar neutral. And I've laid out that argument. If you have not seen it yet, I put out a very short, about 6-minute synopsis of this right at the beginning of this year. I think it was January 1st, 2020, called the dollar tug of war. And so the more the dollar index stays above 99, the more likely it is to build the base and potentially go higher. And the higher the dollar index goes, the more damage. It's basically a wrecking ball with all that dollar denominated debt outstanding. Now, I'm not going to use the phrase out of China. I'm just going to call it the cerveza problem. Because if I drop that, what Google's algorithms, their AI, are doing is as soon as you use one or two words or that phrase, the video is immediately demonetized. Even if you protest it and ask for manual review, it's immediately demonetized. And I've had, I think, 5 videos demonetized in the last 9 or 10 days, just mentioning it once or twice, not even talking about it for more than a second. And the video has been immediately demonetized. I protest, and then the manual review says, nope, too bad. So we'll just call it the cerveza problem, like my friend George Gammon is saying. Well, he calls it their cerveza something. So we'll just call it the cerveza problem for right now, because if I say the real name, Google and YouTube are just being really, really stupid about things right now. But the cerveza problem out of China, professional money managers closing out positions in emerging market stocks and emerging market bonds, professional money managers closing out positions in oil and energy stocks, closing out positions in copper and base metals, they are retreating into the U.S. general U.S. stock market indexes, into the U.S. Treasury market. The 10-year had a big run over the last month in yields. The yields went down significantly, although they did rally a little bit. I think this week the yields did go up a little bit. So maybe there was some profit taking there from professional money managers who were leveraging up those trades in the Treasury market. The Treasury market trading now is very heavily levered. It has never been this heavily levered. 10 years ago, it was not this heavily levered. The amount of leverage from the hedge fund managers trading in the Treasury market is enormous. And again, that is connected to repo as well. My educated guess is that with the repo problems, one of the 4 or 5 different repo problems is at least one large hedge fund that was drastically over leveraged, betting on treasuries, was on the wrong side of the trade, and it blew up. So in spite of the Fed balance sheet, so the Fed balance sheet that came out yesterday, the official balance sheet update, for the first time in 6 weeks, the Fed balance sheet broke out. So the Fed balance sheet had been range bound for about 6 weeks. Now it had been consolidating. It finally broke out of the range, and now it's at 4.182689 trillion. So it started the uptrend again. Now, there's not a massive increase in the official Fed balance sheet. There's not that $60 billion per month and not QE yet. That should be coming unless we see an announcement from the Federal Reserve that they're stopping that. As far as I know, that is continuing. There's been some people suggesting that they cut it back. But what we have seen in cutbacks is the amount of overnight repo offered and the amount of term repo offered. Those have been, cutbacks is accurate. I would call it a slight trimming. So some of these term repos that are, 14 days here on the Zero Hedge article that came out yesterday, some of these term repos have been cut by 5 billion each for the 14-day term repos, and some of them have been cut by 10 billion. So there has been trimming of them. The Fed is trimming these things, but the overall, I think they're still about, talking to my friend Wayne, who was tracking this extensively earlier this week, he was saying that the total amount of outstanding repos each day is still in a range of about 160 billion to around 180 billion, give or take. So that's pretty much the range outstanding. Now, we're not at those levels that we were even at the end of December and November, and obviously when the repo madness started, but we're still at very high levels. Now, China is doing very high amounts of repo and emergency liquidity injections as well because of their cerveza problem, and bailouts. There was an interesting article from the South China Morning Post talking about, in the last couple days, how potentially 10% of all Chinese businesses could go bankrupt in the near future if things don't restart soon, and 30% of all Chinese private sector firms could be firing people. So I may do a separate video on that. I wasn't planning on covering that for this show. But in spite of the Fed balance sheet increasing, the dollar is still rallying. The dollar index, at least, is still rallying. Now, the trade-weighted dollar index, it is very interesting what's going on with that, because the last time I looked at that, I just checked it again. Yeah, they're discontinuing it. So as of January 6, 2020, that was the last update. The Federal Reserve, and I'm not sure why, I don't know why they decided to do this, they've decided that they are no longer going to do a trade-weighted dollar index. Really weird. Does anyone know why? So how long do you think this dollar index rally is going to last? Because if we go to 101, 102, 103, God forbid any higher than that, there's going to be defaults. And in those defaults, it's going to be very similar then to the 2006 and 7 subprime crisis. Also, let me talk about the Fed balance sheet. A couple more key points here from my friend Daniel Lacaille that he put on his Twitter. The Fed balance sheet moved up to 4.18 trillion, the highest level in 16 months, up 423 billion over the last 5.5 months. So at a 16-month high, I guess, for the Fed balance sheet. And I have there a chart of right around when the news of the China's cerveza problem started to massively, the news flow started to massively turn negative. So what you can see is the dollar was starting to be in a very, the dollar index was starting to be in a very serious downtrend, and then it reversed very, very quickly. And my guess is that's flight capital coming out of emerging markets, professional money managers, not necessarily regular retail people, but probably professional money managers first, leaving China investments, leaving emerging market investments, leaving energy investments, leaving copper and base metal investments, and coming to the U.S. And when people come to the U.S., professional money managers, they have to exchange their other currencies for dollars. So that creates more demand for dollars because they need those dollars to buy dollar assets. Brent Johnson, my friend Brent Johnson at Santiago Capital Dollar Milkshake Theory, he's talked about this. So I have a number of articles if you want to read more about the Fed trimming repo for now. Now, I still think we've had a number of spikes, at least one per week over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We've had some big spikes in repo, and then they've calmed down. So I think we could still have a lot of spikes, and I think this repo crisis, I'll try to get George Gammon on for an interview in the next couple weeks. But I don't think this repo crisis is over. I think it has temporarily calmed down because the Fed has drugged it or papered over it temporarily, but I don't think any major fundamental or structural problems have been fixed in the repo. But when the Fed has thrown hundreds of billions of dollars per day at one point into repo, the Fed has calmed things down temporarily. Now, if a major market moves, if the 10-year Treasury goes one way or another too much, and there's a big hedge fund or two that's leveraged up 10x, 15x on the wrong side of the trade, and another hedge fund blows up, then, the repo problems could start all over again. Diana says Australia is feeling stagflation now. All the major economies, even emerging markets and China, are all in stagflate and tax and lie. When I speak to people all over the globe, their taxes are going up, their purchasing power is going down. It takes more currency units to maintain their standard of living. And the government economic data, the government inflation data is not reflecting any of that. DJB says black and white dollar milkshake coming right up. I'm more of a dollar neutral mint chip person myself. Mint chip milkshake. Although I don't drink a lot of dairy products anymore, and I don't mess with sugar. If they have a mint chip protein shake with like stevia, I'm down for that. China's doing repo too, a lot of it. I've covered this with the bailouts. With their Cerveza problem that I don't think they have under control. So the general stock markets did have I would call it not a taper tantrum. I would call it a repo tantrum. So they had a repo tantrum yesterday. It was very brief. I don't even think it was the whole day yesterday. It was maybe for a couple hours, maybe half a day. So they had a brief repo tantrum where they were temporarily down when the announcement came out from the New York Fed that the New York Fed was trimming repo. So the markets had a temporary repo tantrum. Someone will come up with a better phrase than repo tantrum. My buddy Grant Williams called it taper tantrum like 2013, I think it was, for taper tantrum, when Ben Bernanke started to try to trim the Fed balance sheet. So someone will come up with maybe I can't think offhand of a synonym for tantrum that rhymes with repo or sounds good with repo. But gold is holding up pretty strong. Some people are actually buying the dip in oil. It's over 50. Gold's holding up very well. So with the strong dollar rally, gold's holding up very well. That means to me, people are looking at a very serious crisis scenario. Now, the regular general U.S. stock markets are not pricing in a crisis scenario, but in the oil and energy markets and base metals and copper and in gold, the markets are looking at crisis problems. So this is very similar historically. Again, I love using historical references to 1927 and 1929. So there is flight capital coming in here. And when flight capital comes in from other countries, whether it's a retail investor or professional money managers, for them to buy U.S. stocks, like buy the S&P 500 SPX, the S&P 500 index, or the NASDAQ composite index, or the Dow index, or any of those indexes, they have to, if they're in another country, they have to exchange their currency for dollars to buy our assets. So that is what is causing demand, one of the demand drivers for dollars right now. Okay, so I'm just about going to wrap things up for today's short video. I just wanted to bring up one more point. Sandstorm Gold did have their conference call today, so I thought that was very interesting. And they announced their earnings yesterday. Their earnings came out. It was another very solid quarter for Q4 2019, and the full year 2019 was very, very good, a record for the company. I was right when a lot of other analysts, especially ones on Seeking Alpha, were totally wrong. They didn't see the largest increase in revenue in company history coming regardless of the gold and silver price. They didn't see that asset coming online, which is just ridiculous. Such bad analysis there. But I will try in the next day or two, hopefully a couple days, I'll try to have an additional audio podcast behind the Patreon account paywall available for my 250 or so Patreon account contributors. There will be some type of update and analysis with the Sandstorm Gold earnings release, a little bit of stuff from the annual report. I saw some things in there, and a couple tidbits from the conference call. And I'm working on getting Nolan Watson on for an interview, hopefully in the next couple weeks. Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me to tell everyone to hit the thumbs up. I keep forgetting on that. We got a super chat here from Penguin. How do you see the international increases in gold currency ratios affecting the mining stocks? A lot of the miners, Penguin, they report in dollars. So at the mine site with a weaker currency, it should help them on costs, but the dollar rising will also, if the dollar is rising and the gold price is not, that will hurt the earnings for miners. So it depends on a number of factors for the miners. One of the main inputs for the miners is oil and energy costs. It's at least a third of all costs are oil and energy. So with the oil prices at current levels, unless the mining company, the management of the mining company is incompetent and can't control costs at all, or they have a problem at, or more than one problem at a producing mine or mines, then the margins for a lot of these gold miners, when they mine locally in another country with that gold price and then convert their earnings into dollars, then it should still be solid. So it would just depend then if the gold price is holding up strongly along with the dollar. But in general, it really depends where the country, where the mine is, which country the mine is, which country the mine is that the company is mining in. So the local currency are what the wages are paid for the mine workers. And if that currency is devaluing, then the wages are going to be devalued. The wages are going to cost less for the mining company. So there's a lot of variables for a mining company for currencies, but most of the publicly traded mining companies report their earnings in dollars. The ones that are listed on a major US exchange, they report their earnings in dollars. So if they're earning local currency units when they're mining there, and the gold price is high in the local currency unit, they have to convert those earnings back into dollars. DJB says only 3 thumbs up. Well, that's weird. I did not pay attention to Agnico Eagle. In general, they're well run, but I haven't paid attention lately to Agnico Eagle, so I can't give you any good information or analysis. Sorry. Yamui Mata says, why is Alibaba going up if China struggles to get shipments out? Because Alibaba is protected by the Chinese government. Its financials, if you talk to Kyle Bass and Emma Moman, there's enormous amount. Emma Moman just published a really long article in a business accounting journal. It's like 4 or 5 in-depth pages going through all the fraud of Alibaba. It's on her Twitter. She posted on her Twitter in the last 24 hours. I had a long phone conversation with Emma. It's not recorded for a podcast yesterday. It was very interesting. But you can't really short companies like Alibaba because they're protected by the Chinese government. So the financials are, in my opinion, the financials are fraudulent. There's enormous amounts of accounting red flags there, China hustle levels. But you can't short like that because the Chinese government supports the stocks. And there's now party members, high-ranking party members and senior management that were appointed in the last 12 months. So all the major Chinese technology companies that are not officially state-owned enterprises, they have moved high-level ranking CCP members into the senior executives on these Chinese tech companies. So it's complicated. The guy on Twitter, the professional financial professional who doesn't want his name known, he goes under Deep Throat IPO. I know it's a ridiculous name. On Twitter, he talks about this on his China analysis, that a lot of these Chinese companies you can't go long these stocks because they're clear frauds, but you also can't short them because the Chinese government is supporting the stock prices from crashing. So, in my opinion, I just stay away. If you are looking, it sounds like you are looking for shorting opportunities for the cerveza problem in China and the Chinese economy. In my opinion, some of the best ways to play that are more weakness in oil and natural gas and more weakness in copper and base metals. Because the fact because the factories are not running. And we don't know when they're going to restart. They keep saying 2 weeks from now, and then those dates are going to change. Mark says YouTube is suppressing crypto channels. Well, doesn't surprise me anymore. They're in bed with the Chinese government. And China's launching crypto yuan soon. Okay, I got another super chat from Timothy Zero. How do you see the RICO charges for JP Morgan playing out, since there seems to be no change in manipulation of silver and other precious metals? Okay, so normally I did go to law school, I didn't graduate, and I did do well in the criminal law class. But normally with RICO, it is mandatory minimum sentencing. So you're looking at guaranteed felonies, minimum sentencing, unless they keep rolling people over with people going to witness protection, people testifying against their bosses. So this keeps rolling up for a while. So there should be people going to prison. This should not be fines. Normally with RICO. Now, it is very unusual, though, to do RICO against a bank. Very, very unusual. But it seems lately that there's been a lot of criminal conspiracies. And I don't know if you just noticed this, but Huawei just got racketeering charges and RICO charges brought against it too this week by the U.S. Department of Justice. So that phase 1 trade deal that's agreed to, China's going to be very angry. Very, 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 you can keep saying very angry with the U.S. government about the additional charges on Huawei. Because there's a bunch of new felony racketeering charges and RICO charges against Huawei that just came out this week. So that's not going to help phase 1, this phase 1 trade deal, actually be followed through with and completed. Let's just say I was never really optimistic about the phase 1 trade deal, but I am even less so now. So we'll have to see. There should be mandatory multiple felonies unless they agree to testify against their bosses, and then that's how they roll things up, because that's how RICO was initially intended for mob, for the low level, mid level guys in the mob, and then testifying against the higher bosses. That's how RICO was initially intended, but it seems that they're doing a similar principle now with corporations. So you have to monitor this. You have to see. There should be publicly available information on the cases. You should be able to see what people are agreeing to, their sentencing guidelines. If all these RICO charges and felonies and all they pay is fines, the rule of law is broken. Look what just happened with Andrew McCabe today. McCabe the FBI is not going to screw over their own. Look what just happened with Andrew McCabe today. That guy was committing all kinds of crimes. McCabe, the charges were just dropped today. The rule of law here in the U.S. is dicey. Robbie says the rule of law is not broken. I disagree, Robbie. For most people, they do not get justice. They do not get a rule of law here. And the attorney bills, the government court system attorney bills, very, very expensive. The average person, middle class person or working class person can go bankrupt challenging something in court. Mark says, and I agree with him, the deep state defends their own. Exactly. Exactly, and Trump was supposed to clean this up. Trump was supposed to drain the swamp. This is more evidence that he has not drained the swamp at all. But if you want to read more about the repo, the trimming of the repo, now things can totally switch. So if there is another problem, they could just totally do a 180, reverse course. They could reverse course in a couple days or a week. And from trimming repo, it could be increasing again. Because this is what all these central banks are doing. Look at all the emergency liquidity injections by the People's Bank of China because of their Cerveza problem. Just unbelievable amounts of emergency liquidity injections earlier this week, last week. Just insane. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth. Each week. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth each week. If you added it up here, China, the People's Bank of China, may have put $1 trillion in the last couple months. Kevin says, thanks for the awesome videos. Jason, you're welcome, Kevin. Don't forget to hit the like button. And if you want to take a look at my written articles and my audio podcasts that are exclusive for my Patreon account contributors, they will be behind the paywall. It's only $5 a month. And I'm going to continue to work to provide value behind the paywall there because YouTube and Google are looking for new ways to screw me over to demonetize my videos. So the plan is to move more of my income behind the Patreon account paywall. If Google and YouTube are going to keep screwing me over, I don't have a choice. Okay, everyone, thank you for listening to tonight, and we'll see if I can get that Patreon account audio podcast out later before I go to bed.